Okay, welcome to week 4. So far, we've discussed self-esteem, which is the relationship with ourselves. We've talked about face value, which is our personal beliefs. And then we went into reality check, which are our expectations. And so this week is going to be called Rewriting Your Encyclopedia. And what we're going to do is redefine the story that we tell ourselves and make sure that it's aligning with our meaning.
Yeah, so the goal is to create awareness for how we talk to ourselves and, then start to implement all the things we've talked about the last 3 weeks into our thought processes and self-esteem. So our beliefs and expectations are, programmed thoughts and beliefs, and then our self-esteem is, our relationship and our belief in ourselves. And so if we can start to incorporate short-term and long-term goals that align with who we want to be in the future, then we can start to talk to ourselves in a way that gets us there productively and helps us achieve our potential.
Yeah, and the reason why we want to start redefining what we're saying to ourselves is because we have a habit of self-judging. And we talked a little bit last week about confirmation bias and how we find the evidence in whatever story we're telling ourselves. And so if we can make that story align with the goals in our future self, who we want to become or how we want to be in relationship, then it makes it easier for those things to attract. And so, if we're talking about setting goals, what is a good way to be able to set goals? Like, how can we measure our own personal goals? And last week we talked about like measuring success and defining success for yourself. But now we're talking about basically this internal dialogue, and how do you keep that in check? Do you check in with yourself regularly, or do you have like a daily practice where it pauses? Like, what's your strategy?
Yeah, I got a couple examples I can talk about. One is something that I kind of was trying to figure out, what does it mean to be successful, and how do I set goals and then not get attached necessarily to completing that goal, because I'm not necessarily successful because I complete that goal, because that goal can lead to other things being accomplished just because I showed up the next day. And so,
do you have like a specific example?
yeah, so it's kind of a theoretical anecdote where I say, say I buy a plot of land and I'm going to log the land, and so I can only do one tree at a time. And so I go and I show up and I do a tree at a time, and it's going to take a year or two to do the whole plot. Halfway through, I find some gold, and I stop logging because that's not as productive as taking the gold and selling it. And so, is it success, even though I never completed logging the land? And that was my goal originally. I didn't complete it. So at some point, I had to redevelop my goals and go, okay, things changed. I'm gonna change my mind, reassess the situation, and but simply because I showed up and attempted to achieve the next best thing on the next day towards my goals, I was able to achieve, success for that day or whatever.
Yeah, and I think I have another example. So the examples we're giving for the goals and redefining your own expectations and stories have a lot to do with bigger picture items. Like, it's easier to see looking back in retrospect, but it happens on a day-to-day basis. So we're giving you the bigger picture first so that you can create this boundary in your head of what it may look like and kind of what the end result could be, and then what the process is too. So being attached to the outcome of things makes it really difficult, but it's something we all do. And so if we can become more fluid and flexible with kind of, life, when life changes, when plans change, when there's all these other variables that come into play, it creates our balance. Like, we're able to be balanced through the entire process. We're able to show up better for other people and for ourselves. And so my example is, Kyle and I have been looking for a house for, almost like the past year. I alone have been looking for a house for almost like 3 years. And so it was like this long, exhausting hunt. And so because I've been looking for a home, a bigger home that fits like our family needs a little bit better, I withheld decorating the place that I was in. And so what had happened is that, it compiled and the pressure built because I was living in a space that I didn't feel comfortable, because I was like not willing to invest my time and money because I was so attached to this outcome of moving, of being in a bigger house or decorating a different place. And so, the energy in the house and then the visual effects and just feeling comfortable and homey, I just kind of had a wall up to that. And so when I realized we were staying in Alaska a little bit longer instead of moving, I started to empty out, or not empty, but use the fund that I created for, all the stuff in my house, my new house, and kind of repurposed it towards the house that I'm living in. And so when I'm walking around, instead of telling myself like I failed or that it was impossible or that I didn't achieve something I wanted, redefining that story to myself, saying like, okay, well, I am in a wonderful home right now. Like, I am very comfortable. I have everything I want. Like, I really like the design and the interior stuff that's going on. And it feels better. And so you get like a really easy choice to, kind of be miserable, focusing, attaching yourself to the end result, or being flexible and just doing what feels good, making the small steps, doing the improvements of right now. And then they build on each other, And I'm not getting attached to the end result of what's happening here because we discussed maybe Airbnb-ing it, but this is an example of not getting attached to those results, because whether I Airbnb my house with brand new furniture and brand new decor or not, that has nothing to do with how happy I am in the moment, right? And so it's just kind of like bringing your attention back to today, living in today, and taking the baby steps to making sure that your story aligns with your values and kind of backs up like the progression of where you're headed, right? One of my boundaries or one of my values is emotional freedom. And so I don't want to feel trapped ever. And so living in a house where I don't feel comfortable is like a trap, right? Mm-hmm. And so kind of sitting myself back down and realizing that, okay, how can I feed that value a little bit more today has made a big difference.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, the important part of all this is that you tell yourself, talk to yourself in a similar way. These aren't going to be your stories. These are going to be things that you have to start learning for yourself. I have a lot of things, like everything for me is practice. I've said that before, I think, but maybe not, So when something's hard for me, I go, well, how do I want to do this in the future? So because I need to practice that right now. When I either don't want to do something or I'm dealing with difficult emotions, either anxiety or whatever, I go, what's the next best thing I can do? How do I not screw this up? Basically. And so, how do I not have an emotional outburst? How do I, all these things. And so I go through this progression. It could be quick. It could take an hour. It could take 2 hours. I might have to go work through it. But that's my stuff. And so for any individual person, they are going to have their own coping skills and their own abilities. And in the last day of the last week, we talked about team building, and this is where part of your team comes in, and they can help keep you balanced when you maybe are struggling yourself. And so just want to keep bringing up the things we've worked on in the past and how they incorporate into today, and not forget about them, because this is a process. If you remember in the cycle, it's an evolving process. You're always somewhere on the chart and you're never done. There's always something that's going to come up that we're going to have to deal with and react to, and we can always work on. And even if it's just, going and experiencing somebody else's stuff so we can get a new perspective. These are all ways that these things can be implemented in your life.
Yeah, and what I would say is that if you're having a hard time trying to identify, time that this could be helpful, right? Realigning your goals and the story you're telling yourself, you can look back in time, find one example that you really struggled with. I mean, we all have them, because I feel like it's a learned behavior that we have gotten from the prior generations. So find one of those experiences for yourself and look at the whole journey, beginning to end, and start to analyze how you felt during the process and what ideas you were attached to or you were holding on to, because it's very easy to see it in the past. And so after you do that, you'll start to be like, okay, maybe, is there anything like that going on today with me? Or do I have a pattern of that? And if you're in it right now and you're really struggling with attaching yourself or unattaching, I think that's what it is. You kind of start to go crazy because you want the specific thing, you want the result of whatever you've been working at, but you're not going to get that result. You'll get a different one. And so how do you shift gears? You can easily ask yourself, like, what could make this situation better? You know, and it doesn't have to be a material object, but it could. It doesn't have to be a person, but it could be. It could just be a thought. It could just be an action that you need to do that aligns with one of your values, because that builds our confidence and it builds our trust in ourselves, our trust in our environment, and it keeps us balanced.
Yeah, I think the last thing you just mentioned was time, and I think we're going to think of it in different contexts. But for me, there's a difference between setting a goal and having an exact date you want to get it done, and then just kind of letting things happen how they're supposed to. You can put a date on the calendar and say, I want to have this done by this date, but if you get to halfway through and you haven't made much progress because you've been accomplishing other goals, readjust the goal. It's not a failure or disappointment. The goal's still there.
It's an adjustment.
It's an adjustment. And so, these are all beliefs we have. Time is a human construct. And that's something I have to surrender to, is just, things don't always happen the way I think I want them to. And so I have to be like, well, maybe that's not what's best for me,
So
it's a story I tell myself.
Trusting the process.
Yep.
It's hard to admit that we don't know everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Or sometimes anything for that matter.
Yeah. So, okay.